whatever you're giving in this life is literally ingredients for your enlightenment, let's say. I will feel other people's feelings in my body. And I think for a long time I thought of that as like a burden. I realized later on that those epileptic episodes really opened me psychically, because the world might not be as kind, but we can always be kind to ourselves and really listen and open up. That what is your deepest desire? Literally asking the question from the heart, and then pause and give a space and listen and see what your body responds. Like, don't be afraid of moving into the shadow, I would say, because that's a lot of part of my work, is working with the dark night of the soul and the shadow work. It's basically using the pranic energy of your own breath to sort of unblock the stuckness in the body.
Hello, and welcome to the Jeffrey Eisen podcast. This podcast is about using spiritual wisdom, insights, principles, and practices to integrate and embody into your life in a practical way. My guests share their story of their spiritual journey, as well as how their spiritual beliefs, insights, and practices have helped them live a better life. Their life stories help others understand and accept life's challenging opportunities for learning, expansion, and growth. And my guest today is Niloufar Mersadi, originally from Iran, now living in London, England. I met Niloufar a while ago on LinkedIn, and we chatted, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy her as a guest on the Jeffrey Eisen podcast. Welcome, Niloufar.
Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, it's my pleasure. Why don't you start off by telling the guests a little bit about yourself, about your journey? I know I was fascinated by your early years in Iran and your early career choices and your change. Why don't you start off by sharing a little bit of your personal history?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I guess my journey of who I am now actually started quite early, without me even knowing, without me realizing. I remember even as a child, I was quite like a sensitive, you would call like now energy intuitive or empath child. I would pick up things. I would feel other people's feelings in my body. And I think for a long time, I thought of that as like a burden. It was really heavy, and I didn't know what to do with it until I found the right people that really guided me. And then now currently I'm working as a Reiki healer, energy intuitive, and also a transpersonal psychologist, you can call it. I mean, along the way, my career choices really followed my personal healing journey as well. So I a little bit about my earlier childhood experiences, because they're quite relevant to my current path. So when I was born, there was a war between Iran and Iraq. And because of that, my mom was quite stressed, and I developed a lot of what you would call like attachment anxiety, and also epileptic experiences, epileptic episodes. And I realized later on that those epileptic episodes really opened me psychically, and I was able to communicate with the bigger universe, if you call it, or other realms. And back then I couldn't really articulate to anyone, and my parents would just call it like imaginary friends, whereas I actually had a relationship with them. They were like helping me, supporting me. So it's really interesting, because now I'm training as a shamanic healer, and I'm in my Reiki practice. I use angels and all those guides still. So everything happened for a reason, really. And I would call my journey and my story the story of my own healing, how to open my heart and learn to use it as a guide, and how to dive into the darkness despite the fear, and to find the light, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Niloufar, tell the listeners a bit about maybe some advice you give, because I have heard this story certainly on my podcast and in my coaching practice many, many times, how people are born with and identify with this gift. They're not sure how to handle it. Sometimes they don't get the support from parents. I've heard that story before where parents think it's just an imaginary friend. And we're sort of left on our own to try and figure out what this gift is all about. What advice would you give to the listeners in their in order to find that gift? Because sometimes, and I'm sure you would agree, it's not always easy to do it alone.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. I think as adults, if someone is searching for their gifts and doubting themselves, I would really encourage them to develop this almost kindness and love to listen really to their own inner voice, to spend time in quiet, alone, especially in nature. That really opened me up to ground. And I think we talked about this in last time we spoke, that if you find that inner voice, then you can let go of those internal and external noises, really. Because the world might not be as kind, but we can always be kind to ourselves and really listen and open up. Also, I would say that if you're a parent, it's really, really vital that you kind of don't make fun of children when they bring stories about their imaginary, so-called imaginary friends, and so to give them a space and just accept them. You might not necessarily approve or understand, but it's really helpful to kind of be compassionate and allow space. I think one of the great ways that I kind of cultivate that inner voice is to use meditative practices, but also test out things. Sort of like I go around and see what sort of testing out different things in life, different practices, and see if they kind of bring out joy in my heart or sense of flow and excitement, or if they kind of, on the other hand, bring dullness and frustration and fatigue. So then I know what's for me and what's not for me. That's how I kind of listen to that inner voice.
Yes, that's so, so important. I tell people that all of the time. We are vibration, and if you become tuned in or tapped into your vibration, you will find the journey is a little bit easier. That which raises your vibration that feels good, you want to do more of. That which lowers your vibration, you want to do less of. So that's fabulous advice. I hope you're listening, listeners. Tune into that. So often life just seems to be a hustle and bustle, and we don't tap into our own inner voice. Tell the listeners a bit about maybe some advice on finding that inner voice, because sometimes I find people are really not sure between the inner voice and the ego mind.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. I think for me, the key difference that I would say is the how embodied is. You know, like if the inner voice is coming from your true nature or higher self or higher power, whatever you want to call it, for me, usually it's quite visceral. The messages. It's not just an idea. I suddenly have a spark in my heart or some feeling in my gut. So listening with your whole body is one way to distinguish it. Especially the space of the heart is such a gentle and beautiful space. Like my husband and I have this practice that every 2 hours we kind of pause and ask, literally from that space. It's not just a physical heart, obviously. That what is your deepest desire? Literally asking the question from the heart, and then pause and give a space and listen and see what your body responds. I would say that embodied. Usually, when I practice sort of embodied practices like shaking or dancing, they can really help you drop down as opposed to stay in the head.
That's a great idea. Physical um, stimulation obviously gets you out of your mind. I remember coaching a gentleman who told me his meditative practice is going to the gym and either running or getting on the bike, and that physical exertion was able to slow his mind. He was a person that was in his mind a lot, and so that shaking and dancing, that physical exertion is a great way. Tell the listeners a bit about your early career. I believe you and I chatted at one point that you chose architecture, and tell us about that and how you decided to let that part of you go.
Yeah, of course. So there were many reasons that I chose architecture. One of them was that, the kind of classical training and expectations of the society is that in our the society I grew up is that you either become a doctor, engineer, lawyer, or, like an architect, or so there was some value put on these sort of um, let's so to speak, quote unquote, normal paths. So I chose something that I didn't find as dry, and there was some sense of attraction because of the creativity in it that will allow me to sort of express myself to a degree. And I got a lot from those times, and sort of allowing myself to learn drawing and using with software and allowing myself to express myself. But then it's interesting, actually. I left it just before I finished the degree because my heart was really, so to speak, jammed up. Like it was like, no, it was a clear no, you have to leave. So I literally quit 6 months before I got my degree and I moved to England to study psychology. So that was the first time I learned to really listen to the no, to the strong no. But looking back now, because I'm in the process of developing creative online courses, spiritual online courses, I realized how valuable it was to learn those skills, the drawing, the softwares, because they're all coming handy at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. As you're chatting, of course, I realize I've chatted with you before. You're a very heart-centered person, and you not only have tapped into your heart, but you seem to have a tremendous courage and determination to follow your heart. So, step one, we talked about to people, try to tap into your heart, but I know a lot of people that tap into their heart but don't have the courage to follow their heart. Any advice that you have to the listeners on how you can live more of a heart-centered life?
Oh, wow, really? I was just thinking about that actually. Yeah, I was saying that, thinking that, the initial step to actually give a space and be able to listen to the heart and messages. But then after that, what you were saying, courage is a big one. And for me, courage is about faith and trust. These two, for me, kind of are really absolute essential elements of courage, because you can't just like blindly have courage, but trust and faith sort of build a foundation for me. So the way I trust is also, again, to have these practices where even if the voice is vague, I just find that voice that says, you know what you're doing, trust your intuition, I've got your back, it's from my higher self or higher power, you call it. I think that's quite essential. And don't get me wrong, it's really hard to listen to your heart all the time. It's really difficult sometimes, because it means that sometimes you need to swim against the stream. It means that you sometimes may come across financial difficulties, but and sometimes you need to stand alone, and the loneliness comes with it. But for me, it's like, uh, just trusting, just having some faith, whatever form comes to you. What is your faith? What is your deeper sort of trust that, my tribe will appear? I'm not going to be alone forever. And it happened for me. I found my tribe, and I'm slowly finding more and more people who are like aligned with me, and that also adds to the courage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly feeds itself. That trust is a big one, and often the struggle is between the heart and the head, because the mind, has been trained in such a way that it tends to be more negative, more judgmental, and as you're describing it, I felt that journey, and I felt the strong faith and trust you had, because that's the same thing that happened to me. And it's really
Ah.
quite amazing that the more you feed that faith and trust, the stronger it gets. And the less you feed the obsessive, judgmental mind, the weaker it gets. And you wind up having a different power sharing agreement where you are led more by the heart. But it is a journey. And I think you would agree with me, Niloufar, that we don't want to, uh, you know, uh, give the listeners a false hope that this is you flip a switch. This is a journey
Hmm.
of choosing every moment. I've now tapped into my heart. Am I going to have the courage and faith to do it? And I've said this many times before, it's like going to the gym. You don't lift the heaviest weight the first time you go. You start to build up. So following your heart and trusting it allows you to do it more and more and more. And that faith, I have found, has certainly helped me connect in a very, very strong way to the higher realms. It's allowed me to tap into Shaltazar and channel their wisdom. So I think it's really,
Mm.
really important.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about something like what you feed grows, right? Mm.
Yes, yeah, it's really important. And so that first decision to follow your heart is a big one. My recommendation is don't choose a decision that's too life changing. Don't
Mm.
change something that is too hard to have too much courage for. Find something that's smaller. Your heart says today to call this old friend, or to go for a walk in a new neighborhood, or something like that.
Ah.
Follow small steps of what the heart leads you, and then you'll start to build up a trust in the heart
Wow, yeah.
that what the heart is feeding you is for your highest good.
Wow, yeah, it actually resonates with me a lot what you're saying. Yeah, just the small steps. For me, it's like literally every 2 hours, 3 hours, stopping and saying, what does my heart desire? And it just literally just means, oh, like a hot chocolate as opposed to a normal tea that I usually have. You know what I mean? It's like not that complicated to begin with, and then you can expand from there, as you were saying.
I love that suggestion, and I just want to emphasize it to the listeners. It's really brilliant, Niloufar. Thanks for sharing it. Every couple of hours, check in with your heart, because our normal day tends to allow the mind to lead. And no matter what our
Mm.
routines are, no matter what it is, if we're working, um, we tend to follow the mind, and so that discipline of saying every couple of hours, hang on, I'm going to move from my crowded mind to the empty space of the heart, is really brilliant. It's
Mm.
so brilliant you have no idea. And
Opens the heart, doesn't it? Just thinking about it.
absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
And there are ways with our smartphones today in the beginning, because your mind is not going to want to remind you to shut it off and to go to the heart. So get this, program an alarm in your phone every 2 hours, and put some really lovely, beautiful music, very
Mm.
heart-centered music. And when you hear that music, you know it's time to stop for a minute and move to the heart. And eventually you won't have to program the alarm in your phone, because you'll just be used to doing it. You want to create a new habit, a new neural pathway. So I love that idea. And if
Mm.
people want a little help, just set a beautiful tone on your alarm to remind you it's time to go to my heart.
Wow, amazing. Yeah.
And so, Nilafar, take a moment and you know do your heart-centered moment, and bring forth a message, if you don't mind, for the listeners. What would your heart tell the listeners right now?
Mm. Mm. I'm getting this image of a rose that is covered in some sort of a wire, or is wrapped in something and is really not able to exude its essence and its scent. So I think what it means, I usually get images like that. For me, what it means is a symbol of the heart, and it means that if your heart is cluttered or blocked, or you have some childhood traumas or patterns that need to be healed, reach out and get support from heart-centered people who can support you in that, so that you remove these sort of wires, so to speak, or things that wrap around, clutter the heart, let's say, right? So they can breathe. You know what I mean? That
Mm-hmm.
was the image. Like, don't be afraid of moving into the shadow, I would say, because that's a lot of part of my work, is working with the dark night of the soul and the shadow work, and places that we usually don't want to go. But I would really say, until you really unravel those things and remove them from burdening your heart, it's really hard to listen to hear it, really, to hear the messages that comes through the heart.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. I want to get back
Mm.
to to that shadow work and the darkness work that you do, because I'm a true believer that darkness is our greatest teacher. Um, Listeners, if you will notice, when I asked Niloufar to go to the heart, she was very comfortable creating the space. There was no nervousness for, oh my goodness, I have to give an answer. So you could certainly, I could feel her shifting gears. I could feel her from going from her mind that was talking and communicating with me to dropping into the heart, creating the space. It didn't really matter how long it took. You could see that Niloufar is really, really good at it, because it really didn't take very long. And the message was so pure and so timely. And so I just wanted to point out, thank you for demonstrating that. Sometimes we talk and talk and we're feeding people's intellect, but there was a moment where you just helped people by experiencing dropping into the heart. So I hope everybody appreciates that and tries it themselves. The message that you brought was extremely profound. The rose is so beautiful. It not only smells magnificent, but there's a certain delicateness, a certain delicateness to it. And I could feel what you were saying about the shroud of darkness that is over the rose, over our hearts. And, we're in the midst of going through a world pandemic, and that is adding to that shadow, that is adding to the darkness that we are all feeling, on top of the darkness that we've gone through in our personal history. And so now, Niloufar, I'm going to ask you to share with the listeners how they may begin to remove that shroud of darkness from the rose that is their heart.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you. I also want to mention that I'm grateful to you for inviting that moment of silence in, and that's really demonstrates what I want to say now, because we really need each other at this time. As people who are on the path of awakening, especially sort of to support each other. No one can do this alone. It's literally a global crisis, and the way we can do it is whoever first gets in touch with the heart can open the way for the others, and it slowly grows. And I think one of the best ways that comes to my mind now is really valuing the natural environment and connecting deeply with the earth. That's really essential. There is a message in all of this, and connecting with like-minded, like-hearted people, I would say, even if it's just to send a message daily saying, I got your back, I'm here if you need anything. If we know someone who's suffering, these things can really open the heart. And because the fear can be basically fear really sucks life energy. And the antidote to it is definitely love, for me at least. And I can see it in everyone. Love is the antidote to fear, to kind of collapsing down, is the light in the darkness. So finding even a small ways to cultivate that can be really helpful. And another thing that comes to my mind is the sort of spending time in quiet, as I was saying, and blocking out noises externally, especially these days. It can be a lot of external noises happening. And just find that your safe haven, and then from there you can interact with everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I loved when you said that if you are prepared to be a leader and go to the heart and lead from the heart, that others will follow. And that is so very, very important. We cannot abrogate our responsibility and hope that governments and institutions and other people will get us out of this challenge that we're in. Shaltazar calls it the energy of the great potential for change. And the world is going to change, and it's up to each one of us if you want that world to go back to more of a focus on possessions, on the mind, on greed, on things, on hatred and bigotry, or if we want love to be the answer. And as you were saying that, it reminded me, I grew up in the 60s. I grew up in
Mm.
the era of peace and the peaceniks, and all we are saying is give peace a chance, and love and the Beatles. And I mean,
Yeah.
this is the cycle again. This is an opportunity for us to choose love over fear. And the only way to do so is to
Mm.
move to the heart, because the seat where the fear resides and where the love resides is the same place. It's in the heart. And if we feel the
Mm.
fear and we give it love, if we give love to the shadow that's around the rose, then the shadow
Wow.
will disappear and the true essence of the heart, love, will come forth.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
And
really love that image. Thank you. Mm.
well, and you can see how motivating you are, how inspiring you are, because you can notice how excited I am getting. And so, listeners, just realize that Niloufar going to her heart, talking about her heart, talking about how we can let go of the darkness, has enlivened me, has
Mm.
sparked me to open my
Mm.
heart even more than when we started our conversation. So once again, please realize that that by going to the heart, by leading from the heart, whether you know it or not, you are having an influence on those around you.
Mm. Love is contagious as well as the virus, isn't it?
Wow, yes, right. Right, right. And the COVID-19 virus is full of fear, and the
Mm.
other contagious virus that we want to spread is one of love, that is so beautiful and so harmonious and
Mm.
peaceful. And we do have a chance. Share with the listeners a bit about your struggle with darkness and how you came to let it go. Being born in a country that is known for turmoil, is known for suppression. You know, that Iran-Iraq war. I remember that. Um, how did you, tell us a bit about the journey of how you got to this amazing, beautiful, heart-centered woman that you are today.
Mm. Thank you for saying that. I think one thing is present on my mind is because when we were talking, discussing my name, just the image of that flower, the lotus that comes from muddy waters, and it uses that sort of whatever she's given, basically the muddy water to grow. It's not about dismissing. It's more about, okay, how can I use this that I'm given um, to find a way to the surface, if that makes sense. So yeah, for me, lots of the life experiences was around my early trauma, and a lot of it was about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate to express, and just releasing the shackles of that took many years, I would say. And one of the best ways that I managed to kind of work with that was to use that as a fuel, let's say, as a motivation. Because if I didn't have any of those, to be honest with you, I would probably not explore many of these healing modalities that I did today. And that was the reason that opened me up. And the trauma and the epilepsy itself opened me up to having these psychic abilities. So it's about being, for me, it's about, okay, there was a reason that I had those experiences for my evolution. How can I use them? And I still work with them. It's not that I'm completely free from all fear and shackles and everything like that. But as soon as they come, I try to reach out to people I know. I try to come back to my heart. You know, one of the methods that I've been using is rebirthing breath work, which is really powerful. I really recommend, if you have access to someone that's really good at that, to try that. It's basically using the pranic energy of your own breath to sort of unblock the stuckness in the body, wherever is the trauma, the childhood patterns, the anxiety lies. It's really powerful. And also shadow work, working shamanically, going into the depth of the darkness, finding your soul parts, let's say, bring them back. They're all kind of parts of who I am.
Hmm. Yeah, resisting the shadow, I don't think really works, and so many of us uh, try to bury it. And it's interesting, as you were talking about the lotus and the muddy waters. I'm a nature photographer, and I have so many amazing shots of the lotus that has
Mm.
cleared the water, and I get this beautiful, beautiful reflection. And so in that case, the lotus has transformed, has transmuted the muddy water into a clear reflection, a mirror. And it's so beautiful. And that's just another way of saying that love can melt the fear, can help us get rid of the fear. And so realizing that going into the shadows, going into all that we resist, all that we don't like, is an important way of releasing it. Otherwise, the shadow stays caught within us, and we're right back to that image again of the wire or the shadow covering the rose. And so, Niloufar is helping us realize that we all can do it, because no matter what that trauma is, and it's not about comparing your trauma to my trauma, it's about going deep into that trauma, going deep into that darkness, and releasing your true essence, the rose, releasing the rose from behind the shadow.
Mm, beautiful, yeah. I mean, I can think of what I think Ramdas said once, that whatever you're giving in this life is literally ingredients for your enlightenment, let's say. So whatever you're given, you need to work with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, right, and how timely that advice is, because if anyone is listening to this as in this time that we're recording it, we're in the midst of COVID-19, and so we must have been given COVID-19 as individuals and as the collective consciousness, so that it can lead us to the path of enlightenment. But it will take different choices. It will take us looking at COVID-19 as an opportunity, not as a punishment.
Beautiful. Thank you. Mm.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. Um, Anything else you would like to share with the listeners about this journey? We've given them an awful lot, and we've packed it into a fairly short period of time. This is a podcast that I would highly recommend you listen to and listen to and listen to again, because there's some beautiful nuggets where you may want to reflect on them.
Of course, yeah.
Niloufar, what else would you like
Um,
to share?
just I think one thing that has stayed with me from our conversation is how we can become aware that our hearts are our navigation system in the world, and we've been given this sort of navigation system to test out the truth, so to speak. And if they're cluttered or jammed up, we can get lost in life, and it's not all easy to clear that, sort of clear the path of the heart, but it's more, I would say that it's more rewarding than anything else I could ever imagine that I can experience. And I would say just find that inner voice and find that beauty of the rose.
Hmm. I love that one. It was, it was one of my favorite moments in all of the podcasts, where there was just something inside me that asked you to go to that heart center, and you brought up an image that I think speaks so true to everything we're trying to talk about in this episode. Why don't you
Mm.
tell the listeners a little bit about some of the things you're doing as you have shifted from architect and psychologist to healer extraordinaire. I know you are located in England, but here we are talking across the ocean. Today we can, with technology, get in touch with anyone, anywhere.
Mm.
Tell the listeners a bit about some of your offerings and how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, one of the gifts, I suppose, of this time is that everyone's online, and you can reach out to people and find people. It's amazing. So what I've been doing recently is a form of transpersonal counseling or transpersonal psychology sessions, which I help people in their process of awakenings, if especially with the dark night of the soul, what I call, when you're on this path, love can bring out everything that's unlike itself. I think one of my teachers always says that. So things come up quite strongly. The more you expand, the more things come up. And I really support people with that part of their journey. I do distant Reiki healing as well as these transpersonal psychology sessions at the moment. But when things change, then I also see people in person. But for now, online, meeting people online is a great way to connect.
Hmm. Well, I would highly recommend to the listeners that you get in touch with Niloufar because you experienced her heart-centered uh, um, gift. You experienced her healing because she brought forth a healing to all of us today. Niloufar, tell people how can they find you on social media, and all of this information will be in the description of the podcast. But maybe you just want to tell people where you are on social media.
Yeah, sure. Um, First of all, I just want to really thank you. It really inspired me talking to you and also the last conversation we had. So I really deeply thank you, Jeffrey, for inviting me. But the other thing I was going to say is, yeah, on Facebook, I'm quite active. I have, it's called Gaia Mystic Holistic Healing. It's a Facebook page that I have. And I also have a LinkedIn account, which I will send the link. The other thing is that I started this online academy, which I'm going to be posting online courses onto about especially comprehensive holistic healing modalities, like how to work with energy, meditation, self massage, even. Like I've been learning a lot about different holistic modalities. So my online academy link will also be there. I'll send it to you.
Excellent. And also in the description, I will be putting Niloufar's email address if you want to get in touch with her to chat about a transpersonal healing or distant Reiki. Niloufar, you've been a phenomenal guest. I hope the listeners enjoyed our conversation as much as I did. I could feel it. I could feel my heart opening. I could feel my rose opening up and letting out my love to the world. So thank you so much for
uh,
being a fabulous guest. And I hope that we will continue our relationship and
mm,
both continue to help the world in any way we possibly can.
Beautiful. Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Once
Yeah.
again, my name is Jeffrey Eisen. I'm a spiritual life coach, the channeler of Sheltazar, and an energy intuitive. Please check out my resources on my website, jeffreyeisen.com. Also, Insight Timer. I have a whole bunch of meditations. The Sheltazar messages are being posted. I have been inspired during this difficult, challenging time in human history to connect more with Sheltazar, and I have a bunch of new messages that I am posting on Insight Timer, as well as a new conversation series with Mark Lane, a collaborator of mine, and that will be on Insight Timer and other places where we discuss and dissect the wisdom of Sheltazar. Thank you all for listening in. Love and light to you all. See you next time.